Hello, my friends. Welcome back for another session of shadow resolution in Chinese medicine. So we have covered we've differentiated in terms of types of shadow, introjects, projection, and now we've mentioned, and now we're going to elaborate split ego states. Introjection is something that comes in from the outside, and the person is conflicted with an internal part of them, something in their interior that needs to be digested, let go of, and given back. It's coming from the outside, a belief, a thought, a behavior, a feeling, an emotional state, guilt, shame, religious beliefs, all sorts of bases of personal identification that have been taught to us about who we are and how we're supposed to be as we became assimilated into our membership collective, um, ethnically, socioeconomically, politically, in terms of creation myth, all these sorts of things. So the hallmark of introjection is that a person is conflicted with something in their interior is causing conflict, and we want them to let go of it. And that's processed through digestion. Projection is actually a disowned part of the self that, in proportion to the amount of resources used to repress and disown that part of the self and remain deaf, dumb, and blind to it, it is projected onto the surfaces of institutions and other people and relationships in our life in direct proportion to how much energy we're spending to deny that part of ourselves. When it's manifested outside of us, we get triggered by it and irrationally inflate and invest resources into how bad or how incredible the situation of the person is. And the therapeutic task with projections is to reintegrate that part of the self. With introjections, we don't want to reintegrate. We want to let go of. We want to objectify, see that something isn't us, and let go and give it back. With projections, we want to reintegrate a lost and denied part of the self and take responsibility for it. And to the degree we've done that, we cease to be triggered by it in the exterior. So in that sense, we're letting go of an allergy. In a sense, we can think of the introjection almost as an addiction, which is that something's come in from the outside, and then we have a huge investment of attention in it that sustains its presence in the interior. With split ego states are typified by two or more parts of the self that are at war with and in conflict with each other. So these are two dimensions of the self, and they usually that are in conflict with each other, at least two dimensions. And that conflict usually winds up looking like a deep contradiction in the person's life that is expressed ironically as if the person had a split personality. So for the picture here, we have Lon Chaney playing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as a symbol of split ego states. So when shadow content conflicts with other internal parts of the self, it represents a split ego state. Split ego states consist of parts of the self that haven't met or aren't speaking to each other. And this is easily demonstrated in clinic on a continuum from the gross to the subtle. And on a gross level, I mean, we'll go through this, but you have a person who's very fastidious in one part of life and very dirty in another part of life, very upright in another part of life and very dishonest in another part of life, very passive in one in some contexts and very aggressive in other contexts, hot and cold, in and out. But it can come up quite subtly. So I remember having a person buy an airline ticket, fly 3,000 miles to spend a week in the Berkshires and get an intake and then 2 acupuncture sessions from me. And they walked in and sat down, and I said, "What's the problem?" They said, "I have no willpower." Well, somebody made an appointment, spent $2,500, committed an entire week, and showed up on time. So somebody is doing what they want to do when they want to do it for whatever reasons they want to do it for. And yet the presiding ego here is completely denying the part of themselves that was committed and is hopeful and really wants something and can marshal resources to do what they want to do when they want to do it. So it can't be a question of the person not having willpower. It has to be something else. So there's one person who has willpower and is doing whatever they want to do for whatever reasons they want to do it, whenever they want to do it. And then there's the other person whose self-image is, "I have no willpower. Sorry, I can't. Wish I could. Here's my get out of jail free card. I have no willpower." So that's a split ego stage. It's a divided self. And we'll be going more into this. There are 2 kinds of split ego states, vertical and lateral. Vertical, the two ego states are 2 different developmental levels, and therefore 2 different ages. One is relatively mature and the other's relatively immature. And I'm sure we all have experiences, like we can all contemplate the maturity of our average line of development, our average stage of development, like our center of gravity, our developmental center of gravity. And then we're probably aware that we have a leading edge, very high aspirations that at the best of times we put into and try to embrace, hopefully not just on Facebook conversations, but actually in behavior. And then we're aware that under a certain amount of pressure, and for many of us, it doesn't take much pressure, but under a certain amount of pressure, there's a collapse, and all of a sudden we can go from being, say, a postmodern person with very high ideals, who can entertain many perspectives pluralistically, simultaneously, and see the weaknesses and truths in each, the true but partial nature of each. And we can regress from that with a word from a sibling, a word from a parent, a look from a parent, a letter from the IRS, a person we've talked to at work about not leaving their teacups out on the tables, but washing them when they're done. We see a teacup and we know that in 1 second, with just a little input, we can regress to being a victim and seeing the world through much, much younger eyes. And hope likely we all know people who function in the world, but when they're under a moderate amount of pressure to a lot of pressure, and sometimes not much pressure, regress to literally red in the face, narcissistic rage, screaming 2-year-old temper tantrums. So those would be an example of a vertical split ego state. Lateral split ego states, the person is the same age in both of them, they're just contradictory. So the motive of everybody's authentic self, which is selfless, always contradicts those of the ego. So the person who says, "I have no ambition," but they just, as I said, paid several $1,000s to come and commit a week of time and got on an airplane and traveled 3,000 miles. There's one self that has willpower. I said ambition, I mean willpower. There's one self that has will, and there's another self that sees it not having will. But if you interview both those selves, they're the same age. Either one of them would, have the same value system and respond in a way from the same level of maturity, or at least could. So there are excess and deficient modes in each, and so split ego states are the excess and deficient modes in each element. So water can have a split ego state between being completely overwhelming in some contexts in one's life and feeling overwhelmed and being impotent in another context in life. In some contexts, the person appears deep, and in other contexts, shallow. For wood, very aggressive in some aspects of life, but very passive in other aspects of life. Very low self-esteem in other aspects of life. And the aggressiveness can be seen as a compensation for the low self-esteem, and the low self-esteem can be seen as a backing off from the aggression. So there's a lack of, of the drive of wood. So there's a lack of integration. And this can look in life being very organized in some aspects of life, and then totally like windy, expansive, and chaotic in other aspects of life. In fire, dominance and submission. And this can be sexually, but it can play out at more subtle levels and it doesn't have to be sexually. Just a person can be very dominant at work and submissive at home, or very submissive at work and dominant at home, right? So it can go either way. And in some areas of the life, the person's in control, and in other areas of their life, totally out of control. For Earth, the person can be smothering and overly giving, and ingratiating, and in other ways, be very needy and need a lot of care. So a person can be very caring in some ways, seem very caring and almost altruistic in some ways, and yet selfish in other ways. And for metal, a person can be very proud in some contexts, and then that can be covering a very deep shame. It can be a compensation for a very deep shame. And that can come out in the extremes of being impeccable and filthy. So Marilyn Monroe was an example of this. Every picture you ever see of her, she's beautifully coiffed, and her skin is perfect, and her lipstick's perfect, and everything is beautiful. But people who knew her said if you visited her house, there were plates of food all over her bedroom, and she ate in bed and didn't change the sheet for a month, and often wouldn't shower when she wasn't working for 3-4 days at a time, and her house and her room were just filthy. So these can all be looked at as split ego states. So with split ego states, we want to move stagnation for the sake of integration. Shadow is a form of stagnation. So introjects cause stagnation by coming in, and because they're undigested, they can form a kind of dampness in the interior. But introjects can also lead to congealed blood and any of the internal pathogens. And those are all a form of stagnation, something in the interior that comes in, an excess that comes in and demands attention. And the attention that we give that and the resources that try to move that, but can't move it, that are consumed, all of that is going to create stagnation. And we will see a person's stagnation in life and they're essentially stuck in front of a thought, a feeling, emotion, a sensation, an idea. And usually a miasm, an unhealthy vapor, a conglomeration of all of those things. So we have to remove what's hiding this content from people, the pathogens, the repression, to promote communication. Split ego states are dimensions of the self in denial of each other that it seems like they haven't met, and they get triggered by each other. They're sort of at war with each other. So we want to promote communication. This is separation, and separation is pain. And we want to promote communication, which means promote the flow of chi. So of course, everything we do in terms, and we'll go over this on other slides and then more in the class on treatments, anything we do to promote the flow of chi is promoting flow of chi is just a metaphor, a physiological metaphor for communication and getting rid of separation and moving a human being toward unity. And of course, that ultimate unity on the subtle level, a unity that we're looking for, a unity that embraces all aspects of being, and that would be relative stages of enlightenment and wholeness. So the bigger the front of something, the bigger the back. Strengths are generated as talent, and talents externally as compensation for internal weaknesses and lack of virtue. So water, instead of being wise, uses resources to be clever. Wood, instead of being benevolent and compassionate, learns how to argue and be right. Fire, instead of having union, can learn to be seductive and manipulative and communicate a lot socially, but not really say anything, right? So earth can be very nurturing and very caring, but there's giving with one hand, taking with another, because there's always that expectation, that resentment of I'm saying yes, I'm giving, I'm giving, I'm giving, and it's not coming back to me. It's not coming back. I'm not being taken care of, right? And metal can be very righteous and upright, and that can transform into self-righteousness and pride and ego. Right? So a person can look very beautiful on the outside, like Marilyn, but be very empty on the inside. So these are all split states. So again, examples of split ego states: submissive in work, dominant at home, dominant work and submissive at home. Bragging in the gym about all their conquests and then to cover up impotency. Hyper clean in one area of life, messy in another. Very concerned with justice in some contexts, but so much so that they perpetuate injustice. And that is, the principle that we become what we hate. So we can see how the Marxists overthrew the Confucians and got rid of the notion of Ming, of destiny, which they said was used to enslave the masses, and then they enslaved the masses. So, a person, and we can see split ego states typically, for instance, in the person who wants intimacy. They're coming to us. They want to heal, they want to trust, they want an intimate relationship. It's most of what they talk about, but they only pick unavailable partners. Their last partner lived 3,000 miles away. Then they went through 5 relationships with people on Facebook and dating services where they were just texting, and they have a history of being very passionate in the beginning of a relationship, and then as soon as things started to become real, changing from hot to cold. So we can understand these patterns, all the 5 elemental patterns I went through, as a divided constitution, And resolving the constitution holographically integrates it back into the 5 elements so that the wheel becomes more of a circle and not an oblong structure tilted toward the dysfunction of an element. So in terms of split ego states, because we can often see them elementally, and not just horizontally elementally, we can see them vertically elementally. And so how would that be? I described horizontal split ego states, which would be like wood type being very organized and very chaotic, or a metal type being very clean and fastidious or being very dirty. Those can be lateral split ego states, but what about vertical split ego states in the elements? The vertical split ego state is that the person's leading edge in wood is benevolence, but their trailing edge is arrogance. The leading edge in fire is communication and union, and the trailing edge is, being a victim and being manipulative and easily manipulated. So propriety is the virtue in fire, doing the right thing at the right place at the right time. And then just, confusion in the heart, confusion in social relationships through heater, confusion in intimate relationships, pericardium, confusion in small intestine, which is just confusion about everything, not really being listening, not feeling one isn't heard, and not communicating properly. And then, of course, in the heart, going back and forth between being a, compassionate and a tyrant, for instance. So the leading edge of every element, the highest edge in a split ego state, will be the degree to which anybody's realized the virtue of that element. And then the trailing edge that we can regress to is just dysfunctional relationship to the emotion in the elements. So the definition of wisdom is knowledge of emptiness and being able to live in not knowing and be free when one doesn't know, to abide in the unknown. And that would be anybody's leading edge in water to the degree they've cultivated virtue. And then the trailing edge would just be decaying into fear and letting fear govern our significant choices and decisions. So the clinical response is that we want to interview the patient. We're interviewing their ego state. So in terms of therapy, we want to integration. We want to introduce the 2 parts of the self. And of course, there can be more than 2 parts. Internal family systems therapy, and we're going to have a lecture on IFS. Recognizes different parts of the self that are in conflict with each other. And so we're going to, we'll consider that in the context of that lecture. But the therapeutic goal here is to take the 2 parts of the messy part and the clean part, the organized part and the unorganized part, the part that has complete ambition and the part that is impotent and feels impotent, the part that's warm and the part that's cold, the part that's in and the part that's out. And we want to interview them, have the patient interview them through this exercise and introduce them to each other. So to the younger state, we can say, what happened? What did you learn? Now, this comes up with introjects. It comes up with projects. It's just fundamentally the model here is that a person has a trauma early in life, draws a constitutionally determined conclusion about the meaning of that trauma for themselves, what it means about others and what it means about the nature of existence itself, forgets that they even drew that conclusion, and it becomes the operant view that they're looking through in their whole life, interpreting everything through, excluding all content that comes in that suggests the partiality of the view, and only letting into consciousness that which reinforces and proves the view. The ultimate constitutionally based confirmation bias. So what we want to know is what happened, describe the situation, who was there, where did you feel it in your body, where do you feel it in your body now, what emotions, sensations, feelings, ideas, beliefs, and behaviors are associated with it. So what happened, and what did you learn? What meaning did you create? The fundamental notion here is that human beings create meaning, and it becomes very interesting to us when people create meaning that creates separation and is the basis of unnecessary suffering in self and other. So what happened and what did you learn? How has it served you? So by asking how it served you, we're helping the younger self feel appreciated for its compensation, because it was doing the best it could with what it had relative to the state of development of its immature mind. Human beings don't really have the foundation for developing a mature mind until somewhere between the age of 18 to 21. And most of these traumas and incidences, happen much earlier in life. I mean, we're assimilated into the membership collective when language is incipient, beginning probably around 1, but very strongly between 2 to 4, 2 to 6 years old. And 6 years old really is sort of a real very significant foundation in life. I mean, if you've had love and you've had proper care up to the age of 6, even if terrible things happen, there's a solid foundation. And if you've been abused and neglected up till the age of 6, to some degree, we're going to be building on a weak foundation because of negligence and abuse that happened during very potent early developmental windows that open and close sometimes in months. So we're interviewing the younger state, and first we get just the facts, ma'am. What happened and what did you learn? And then we reinforce positively, recognizing the contribution of that part of the self so it doesn't feel alienated. How has what you learned served you? How did it help you survive? What were its strengths? I can remember, in terms of a bit of self-revelation here, but I think it's not too atypical. I think it's a pretty human experience. When I was young, I had long hair because I was really, starting in 4th grade, I started growing my hair long, and I was just really influenced by the Beatles. And by 6th, 7th grade, I was reading Tim Leary and Abbie Hoffman and all that stuff. And I was very influenced. The 60s milieu and the Cultural Revolution of the 60s. Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Allen Ginsberg, all of that was happening at the time, and I was aware it was happening. And because I had long hair, I took the position in face of the Vietnam War of being a pacifist, and boys at school knew I wouldn't fight because I was a pacifist. And so I would get beaten up. I would get in fights. And I had 2 compensations for that. by the time I got to college, I was feeling rather differently, and I enrolled in a martial arts class, and that got me to fourth degree black belt in full contact fighting. And I did that for martial arts very seriously for 27 years. I ran a school for 16 years of Taekwondo at the Kripalu Yoga Institute. But I also remember when I was 13 thinking to myself very clearly, I can't fight because I'm a pacifist, and I'm going to be smarter than everyone else. And I'm going to hone my mind to such a degree that I'll just be way past these people. And of course, there was a genetic basis there. And I was raised by voracious readers, and we had an incredible library in the house. But I very clearly remember the realization that my mind is how I'm going to survive, and my mind is a weapon. And so becoming very knowledgeable was very important to me. And by the time I was 13, I was probably reading 2 or 3 books a week. No joke. I mean, I was just reading voraciously through junior high and high school, and proceeded the rest of my life doing that. So I can see how that helped me survive, and I can appreciate that. But I've also long since seen through the conclusion of having to be, because if you're using your mind as a compensatory mechanism and a survival mechanism, then it's the most threatening thing is not to know. And when you can't not know, you're very arrogant and feel very challenged by and project upon and very triggered by anybody who knows more than you, because then they're a potential threat. So that all got worked through about 22, 23 years ago. But anyway, I can look and I can see how it served me and how it helped me survive. So I can appreciate that. And then we can ask the younger state, how do you experience the older ego state and its desires? So for instance, the child decided, I've gotten burned. I can't trust. I was betrayed. And it's very scary for me that the 30, the 40, the 50, the 60-year-old wants a relationship. I'm terrified by it. It's very scary for me they want to lose weight. It's very scary for me they want to exercise. It's very scary for me they want to stop drinking, because these are the things I did. It's very scary for me that the hyper-rational person who used their mind to learn so much is now beginning to deconstruct that. And of course, this fear is one of the substantial bases of law of cure and dark nights of the soul, dark nights of the ego, dark nights of the spirit, where that self becomes terrified that self that helped us, that served us and helped us survive as a compensatory mechanism, isn't needed anymore. And what's it going to do? What role is it going to play? So we ask what happened, what meaning was created, how has it served you, how did it help you survive? And then we ask, how do you experience this older self? Let's talk about it. And then we have the person take the position of the older ego state. and of the younger ego state. So we were just the older self speaking to the younger self. Now we're the younger self speaking to the older self. Compassionately, what is it like for you living with the meaning I made? What further experiences have you had in life since that trauma occurred and since the meaning was created? Have you had experience which has suggested to you the partiality of the view, the partiality of the conclusions that I drew. I'm generally interested. How is it living with my emotional outbursts, my fear, my reticence to engage in relationship, my reticence to have willpower, to be ambitious, to make commitments, whatever it is? The younger self is just asking with interest and compassion, how is it with you living with that? What's your experience? What have you learned since? We just have the two parts of the selves continue a dialogue, continue to talk with each other. And the older state can let the younger state know, I really appreciate everything you've done for me. But, I don't need to know anymore. And when I don't know, it's actually much easier for me to just say, hey, I don't know, but I'm interested. I don't know. Does anyone here know? What do you think? It used to be students would ask me questions, and if I didn't know the answer, I'd either make something up, I'd give a partial answer, which intimated that I knew way more than I really did. And it was totally liberating to get to a point where I can just teach transparently from what my experience actually is. And if I don't know, just say I don't know. It's just totally freeing. So we have the two states talk to each other, get to know each other, and then we want the individual, because the individual is neither of these ego states. The individual is the unconditionally loving witness, consciousness itself, and these ego states, both of them, can be made to be objects in the awareness so that we can start to see how they conflict with each other, and we just have them make friends with each other. And we can just hold them both in the unconditional loving, in the field of unconditional love of the witness that can embrace and see all of it, because all of those inner states, thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, and ego states, they're all objects in awareness. They're not self, capital S. This is very important. So for treatment, we want to it's simple to say, and I hope this isn't too simple, but it might be obvious, at least it's obvious to me, and it jives with my clinical experience, is we want to promote communication and do everything in Chinese medicine, to promote communication. So move qi, tonify blood, move congeal blood, move dampness, move heat, move all the stagnations and all the consequence of repressions. Integrate the constitutional element with source and low points, right? So there is a splitting in the element where liver and gallbladder stop talking to each other, right? And liver holds the plan, and gallbladder has to implement that plan in the world. And the whole point of constitutional 5-element acupuncture is to integrate and reintroduce and create union and profound intimacy between the yin and yang officials in an element, because everything else that's going on in the co-cycle is seen as a secondary compensation for it, right? A secondary compensation, just a sign and a symptom of this underlying fundamental constitutional splitting. So we can reintroduce the two of source and low points. We can do entry-exit blocks, open up the orifices of the heart with the yin entry-exit blocks, open up the sensory orifices with the yang entry-exit blocks. And this ceases repression, promotes communication, stimulates flow, and begins to bring in the worldview of the other officials. So entry-exit blocks that are of most significance are the ones between different elements, right? So small intestine and bladder, heart and spleen, liver and lung, kidney and pericardium, gallbladder, 3 heater, colon and stomach. These are all different elements. So We begin integrating all the elements with each other, promote flow in the channels, harmonize the constitutional element, and keep helping objectify the split ego state. So a person brings awareness and they just notice. I want you to notice all the places in your life where you're hyper vigilant in terms of being clean. And whenever you see a tendency toward that, take a look at some area of your life that's dirty. And we start to see all of these start coming together, and the person has less extreme behaviors and reacts less, because the hypervigilant person can get triggered by the hyper clean person will get triggered by the other part of themselves. But these are the dirty part, but these are two parts. And that dirty part can be projected externally because they don't see their own dirty part. They just keep putting away and throwing everything down in the basement or sweeping it under the cover. So we promote communication. We do points for the average developmental stage of the person, their center of gravity, their leading edge, and their trailing edge. So if a person is at mythic membership stage, which I generally place as being centered in the fourth chakra, just above the diaphragm, their trailing edge might be magical thinking. And that's going to be second chakra and sexuality. So their sexuality, second chakra, might be in total conflict with what they learned in their membership tradition. And they might have a leading edge in pluralism, which I have put around I would say it has a tinge at the top of the heart, but it's really quite focused in the top of the fifth chakra at the throat, and that leading edge is speaking up and saying, I did learn all these things in membership and I was taught this relative to my sexuality, but I need to have a voice. I need to have a voice. So for the trailing edge, we're working around in the lower chow, around, between CV2 and CV8. For the average stage of development, we're working on upper kidney points and around the heart and the lungs in the upper chow. And then for the leading edge, we might be opening windows of the sky around the throat. So as an example, so average, I guess I just went through this. The average, it's interesting that I did this because I haven't looked at the slides since I made it 2 years ago, other than to make this individual PowerPoint. So the average stage of membership is fourth chakra, repressed sexuality is second chakra, deny shadow content we might deny shadow content associated with early abuse. This repression generates heat in the heart and lungs, and the person has shame over their sexual urges. So they may have a dry upper chow, fostering fundamentalism and harsh judgment against self and other, and harsh judgment against other people who are sexual or doing things that go against one's membership beliefs. So here I talk about, lung 5 and 1. Lung 5 is the water point, and lung 1 is the mu point for lungs, and 5 as the water point would tonify yin. Lung 1 would help synchronize. As central treasury, the central treasury is the zangqi at the center of the chest that synchronizes the rhythm of the heart, pericardium, and lungs with each other. CV17 is primordial child, which is that the home of the zangqi, the ancestral qi that synchronizes heart and lungs together. And its name is primordial child, and it touches that dimension of the self prior to it, that exists now prior to abuse. It's uncynical, it's unwounded, And it's just completely enthusiastic about union. And then we can do kidney 3 as the source point on kidney, and the earth point to ground with kidney 24, soul burial ground, to awaken the soul and awaken potency in the upper chow. And to get down to the middle chow, we can do 16, which is the root of the Gao Huang, and that can treat second and third chakra repression and help open up the heart and help cool and calm lower instincts and impulses. Instincts are second chakra. So first chakra is reflex, right? First chakra is reflex. That's when you have an infant and you go like that, or there's something jumps and you just see the infant shudder. The young infant can't institute movement. They just move reflexively. So first chakra is reflex. Second chakra is instinct. That's sexual. What does the sexual urge want? You and me right here now, consequences be damned. The sexual impulse itself has no morality in it. Any morality that anyone has relative to sexual engagement comes from much higher stages of development than the second chakra. So second chakra is instinct, and third chakra is impulsive, which is the 2 to 4-year-old screaming, I want the dolly, buy me the dolly. It's just impulse. You just smack your brother, smack your sister, throw the mashed potatoes against the wall. It's just temper tantrums. Okay. So I think we got through split ego states. And that's only 50 minutes. That didn't take long. So for homework, and of course, you study the slides, learn the slides, contemplate all this, and then engage very deeply. It's, again, always going to be easier to see them in other people. You can just start noticing split ego states in other people and in your patient, and start learning to see introjection, projection, and split ego states. It's easy to see when they're explicit, but remember, color, sound, odor, and emotion, when they shift, are always cluing us in to fundamental distortions and lack of communication. And it's easy to see a split ego state when a person's having a narcissistic rage and temper tantrum. Just start looking for them in people and contemplating people and then, of course, do this for yourself. So contemplate, what are the fundamental contradictions in my life, and how might these represent split ego states? And consider, are they associated with an element? So if you know your element, and I'm sure everyone here has some idea of their element and some notion of what they are, consider what split ego states you might have, and how they might relate to the associations of your element. So again, water will be around power and ambition, and wisdom versus fear. And woods will be about organized and not organized, and around perspective and lack of perspective, and around self-esteem or arrogance, belligerence and benevolence. Fire will be around union and intimacy and trust, and manipulation, seduction, betrayal, being in control and out of control. Earths are going to be around caretaking and neediness, being enough and not enough, altruism and selfishness. And metal's going to be around pride and shame, being inspired and uninspired, transparent and hard as steel. And so consider the elemental associations. When you notice split ego states in yourself and in others, are they make the distinction? Are they horizontal or vertical? How do they fall in the context of an element and how? And then go through that fourth slide above. I think it's the fourth slide. Initiate an ongoing conversation with yourself between the older and younger self. Don't do this with others yet. Don't do this with your patients. Really work it yourself and have the conversation and go through and really contemplate and consider and keep at it until you begin to feel there's a mutual understanding and integration, and that the younger self is appreciated for how they helped you survive and forgiven for drawing a there's not even needed. There's an appreciation for the compensation that helped get them through, and then let it know, you don't have to do that anymore. I can handle myself. And when they say, but what do I do? Think of other creative things it can do and other ways it can help. And well, you can still be really wise. You can still be smart. You can still, but you don't have to freak out when I don't know something, because I'm actually fine not knowing. Now, so keep at all this until you feel some mutual understanding and integration. And then just notice what your experience is of doing all this. So, okay, we got to just about 1 hour. It's interesting. I think one of the classes was 2.5 or 2:40. And so many have come right in at 2 hours and some a little under. Anyway, engage with this going forward. Please bring your experience of it to our meeting. And you can also, while you're doing this work, notice how your consideration, for instance, of split ego states may engage projections. There are projections associated with them. The part of me that's very clean can't stand people who are very hyper clean, maybe, and the part of me that's really messy can't stand people who are messy, and the clean part of myself can't stand the messy part, and vice versa. So look, if there's introjected content, well, what introjections do I have? Was I told that I'm just chaotic? Was I told I'm too arrogant when I'm young? Do I have pride? Do I have shame about these things? What's mine and what isn't? Okay, my friends, thank you. I look forward to seeing you in class soon. Bye.